Well, here we are, everyone. Hopefully peeps will begin filtering in shortly. But yes, gonna just make sure everything is sounding, looking good, share this link, so on and so forth. Get that done. Already got one like, despite the fact that I don't see somebody actually in the chat ski. So hopefully I will see peeps starting to jump in. Oh, there you guys are. What is going on? You will likely see that I am in a different spot today. And that is because you've got Pennywise up there, but I just don't know if I want to have that much action going down, trying to get this nice and centralized and everything. But yes, everybody, Zach King. I am doing fantastic, Zach. What is going down? And very excited to be talking about it's not like a super mainstream sort of Sai King adaptation, but it's one that I most definitely love and appreciate. And anytime I revisit some of these lesser known King things, I truly believe that it gets a little bit more interesting. But I will give some context once we have given everybody a few minutes to filter in. El Priest says, hello from Zurich. Wow, what is going on? So very happy to have you joining. And all of the cool stuff behind me is because I am at the Horror Show Studios because Cecil and I just got done watching Lamb. And yeah, it was something else. Sorry, I'm just going to jump on down and share this link with the quickness. And then after everybody has the chance to kind of jump on down, we will get this rock-a-lockin' proper. So I'm going to make sure my volume is all the way down. I want to share the live link, but I hope everybody is having a terrific Tower Tuesday. Francis Chainsaw Graham says, greetings. Well, greetings to you as well, Francis. Thank you so very much for cruising through briefly. So going live an hour later than per normal, and that is because, yeah, as I said, checking out the newest A24 Numira base, and yeah, we're gonna do a review right when we get done with stuff here on Hail to Stephen King. So excited about that. Share this link to the group and give everybody the proper chance. Okay, Richard Forrest, hey Fuego, what is going, Richard? Thank you so very much for making an appearance. And yes, indeedy. Okay, toss that back down. It's very, very different being at these digs, but I mean, look at all of the rad statusness that Cecil has going on. I mean, from buried antenna up there to this badass Freddy painting that we have, even behind me, which I am blocking, unfortunately. So yes, very, very stoked. Having issues sharing this link, so let's just X this stuff out before we start everything proper. But yes, once again, hope everybody is having a terrific. No, shush, come on. It's always a process when you're opening up the different browsers and etc. etc. Live up. Ora! On a blingy. And yes, so we will be talking about both the book and the movie. That wasn't the initial intention because last month we did The Regulators, which is the twinner, the sister novel, I guess you could say. I don't know why they say sister instead of brother, but the sibling novel, I guess, is a proper way to put it. But okay, so we're going to X that out, and I am just going to launch into it here in just a moment. Since, like, I always try to wait till we have like double digits of peeps here, and we are so very close, so very close. And if you're in attendance, please, like is very much appreciated. Francis says, do you own a book called Stephen King at the Movies, Starlog Press Publications? And I like addressing this sort of stuff in the preliminary process. And yes, I actually do. I don't have the hardcover as much as I would like. And that one is interesting, though, because granted, it's a bunch of reprinted stories. But the cool thing about it is that King gives these brand new introductions to each of these like very prolific adaptations. And yeah, as somebody who has a lot of nonfiction Sai King essays that he's put together over the years, it's definitely definitely one that I greatly appreciate. And just I like where he just gives his thoughts like person to person. That's why anytime he has like an extended introduction, preface, whatever it may be. If you own all of those other stories already, I don't know how much I recommend like the price of admission sort of situation, but nonetheless, it's always intriguing to hear what he has to say, both about his own works and if you have something like the corresponding thing for On Writing, which is oh God, the title is eluding me, and it's back. If I was at my proper casa, I would definitely be able to hit you up with it. But yeah, it's a collection of like introductions that he did for Clive Barker work, for talking about Peter Straub and various other things. It's intriguing in that regard. But since we are on limited time, I have the soft cover, just making sure you owned it. Otherwise, I'd send it your way. Secret Windows. There you go. Thank you, Zach King. Yeah, Secret Windows. I have it. It's like almost like a book club sized hardcover that they put out. And it's just a collection of a bunch of different stuff that would later be put into some of the anthologies, the short story collections, and then also all kinds of other things that he has done writing about. It's kind of in the vein of Dance Macabre, but it's a Frankenstein assembly of a bunch of pieces. And so, now is as good a time as any. Let's get this rock-a-lockin' and let's get to talking Desperation. So brace your eardrums, everybody. Long days and pleasant nights, fellow travelers along the path of the beam. I am known on this level of the tower as Jaime and Fuego, and if it please you, join me here for a bit of palaver on Hail to Stephen King Live. That's Reezy, and obviously bienvenidos and welcome to the horror show. So very stoked to have you joining me here on a Tower Tuesday. And you can probably notice for those who are here on the pre-show, because I often trim this down to just when the show actually like starts proper, you will see that I am at the Horror Show Studios, and that's because as opposed to being at Casa in Fuego, where I film the show normally, I was out in the East Valley here in the deadly desert of the Phoenix, Arizona metropolitan area, doing a viewing/review of Lamb, the new A24 with Cecil. So we're going to be filming that right after I get done with this live show. But yes, very excited here for the live book of the month. And we are covering none other than Desperation. That's right, Desperation. So it came out on September 24th of 1996. So just this past month that we finished before heading into the spectacular awesomeness that is October. And so I knew immediately, since both that and this baby, The Regulators, came out on the exact same day, I just knew 100% that I wanted to give this one a go along with the other one. And I was like, how will I divide them up month by month? Because I wanted them being twinner novels, so to speak. I wanted them right next to each other. And so as opposed to the previous time when I was going through every single bit of Sai King's work in its published order, I read Desperation first, and then I read The Regulators. And I feel like that made me disregard certain aspects of The Regulators, because pretty much every character from Desperation is in The Regulators, and yet The Regulators adds a bunch of other characters, most of them cannon fodder, if I'm going to be kind of spoilery about this. And this is a spoiler discussion, everybody, by the way, just to let you know. But I wanted to do it in reverse order upon this reread of both of these books that were dropped on the same day in September of 1996. So 25 years of both of those. But then I remembered, as I was looking through some production notes, because I have a whole spreadsheet of all kinds of upcoming episodes, different anniversaries, topics I still want to cover, and collaborations I want to do. And I remembered that on May 23rd, just had to double check the date, of 2006, that was when they released this mofo. Yeah. Desperation. It was a one night event kind of thing, directed by Mick Garris, and it came out in 2006. And so 15-year anniversary for the adaptation to screen, albeit the small screen, and then the 25-year anniversary of the book itself. And so I'm not really going to go as much into a lot about The Regulators compared to Desperation, because I feel like Desperation is a book that is so much more dense, especially in a lot of its themes. Now, that doesn't mean that I don't adore The Regulators so much more after that reread last month, but Desperation feels so much more like a Stephen King book, and I kind of picked up more so on the nuances in comparing both of them this particular time, because the Regulators is really a go for the jugular. It's not to the depth of like rumination and the existentialism and especially the religious aspect that you have so heavily in the in Desperation. And so, yes, I am very excited to give a little bit of a compare and contrast. I finished the book. I always like to read and then listen. And the cool thing about this particular book is that Stephen King reads Desperation himself, and it's kind of a monster. It's like 690 pages, and so for that reason, it's very cool to hear that he was willing to give that sort of dedication, and it shows very much that he really enjoyed this work and that he had a beloved sort of connection to it. And yeah, it feels so much like a Sai King book, whereas the Regulators in its fast-paced kind of craziness. That's not to say that, Desperation does not go into brutal territory. This is definitely some of Sai King's darkest work, and also it's not the death of a lot of characters that you love. Now, granted, people die in this, obviously, but as far as a body count and like the full-on destruction of a town and stuff like that, this is up there with some of the most death that is discovered and happens throughout the story. And so, major regards in that particular factor. So I see there's a few other peeps that are jumping through. Austin is here. I work in a mining lab in Reno, so I definitely have a great liking for this book. I can definitely tell he did his research about mining. And that's definitely a thing that King, thankfully, he always consults the experts, and he usually gives them major thanks at the beginning or in the afterword and stuff like that. So yeah, he is definitely all about that. And I respect it, as opposed to getting convoluted and just kind of making things up. Anytime, like, he's always proclaimed you write what you know, but in this case, and in various others, he's like, okay, I know how I want to write characters and certain experiences that they have, but I want as much of a just accurate sort of portrayal of all of that in comparison with somebody who just goes in blind and writes. And then all the fact checkers, which all of us on YouTube, we are so enamored and also just infuriated by the fact checkers, because goddamn, they love correcting you when you say something wrong. It's hey, if you get off on that sort of thing, and I know not everybody has malicious intent when that transpires, but yeah, it's always amusing. So Robert says, my first King novel as a kid. Damn, Reezy, man. And this is a brutal King novel, as I said, and yet it's so multi-layered, and it has so much going on with themes of alcoholism, with themes of finding religion in the midst of crisis, and it goes into so many different things. And you've got just a lot of King tropes too, which I'm not going to shy away from saying. Yes, we end up going into the layer of another villain, as you've seen in so many different things, from It to The Outsider. But it's one of the stronger things that I think King did in the 1990s, aside from the Tower stuff, because the Tower stuff in the 90s was just terrific. So Austin says, did it bug anybody else that Audrey wasn't in the movie? Yeah, we will definitely get to that in the comparison process. I like the movie. I do, especially after rewatching it last night. I'll get into the killer cast, because the cast is actually terrific in that. I don't like some of Mick Garris's directorial choices as far as some of the camera angles and stuff that he instructed his cinematographer to do, but nonetheless, I feel like there's a lot of strength to it. The weird thing about the Desperation film is that despite airing on ABC, it's listed here on the back of this DVD as being R-rated for violence and gory images. Okay, yeah. That's the thing. I don't know if on the home release they restored, like maybe they cut away from some of the hanging corpses we see in a few scenes or whatever. But I think, especially with Ron Perlman, as Collie, and Scarrett and the rest of the cast, Steve Wepper. We'll get to it. We'll get to it. But I just want to make sure that everybody is like properly addressed. I'm glad that the numbers of attendance have risen a little bit, so we can have significantly better palaver. Travis Miller has jumped on and says, I got a few to read this. So just popping in to say, hey, I'll check this video out later. You're doing good work with these reviews. Midnight Mass kicks ass. Yeah, if you haven't watched Midnight Mass, it's the most Stephen King thing, in my estimation, that Mike Flanagan has ever done. It's very good, and the more I've ruminated on it, the more I've thought about it. Small town, crazy things going on, religious, overzealousness, and various other aspects. It's a very fascinating work. It's currently on Netflix, and well, that's where it's always going to reside because he has a first look deal with them. And so pretty much everything Flanagan is going to be coming through them. But today we talking Desperation, obviously. Zach King also chimes in with, when I was 5 or 6, the cover of Desperation freaked me out. I had a thing about dolls. Yeah, exactly. Poor Pie and her doll that, obviously was, dropped when they were being taken from the RV and everything. So I saw the original airing, and I don't think they added anything for the DVD. Yeah, I thought the same thing, because I'm pretty sure that I watched it when it was airing on ABC in 2006, and yet it's listed legitimately here on this DVD. And this is a North American DVD R rating, and like an American one, because I know they have a different rating system up in Canada. So very strange. But so let's get to talking about Desperation. And so Desperation, once again, released September 24th, 1996. You also have Stephen King actually reading the audiobook, which adds a lot of additional awesomeness to it. But smaller cast than the Regulators, despite the fact that the Carvers and everything that happens to them in the Regulators. And then obviously, with Steve and with Cynthia. And awesome to see Cynthia getting a little bit more of a look after being in Rose Madder and being a relatively minor character, and she gets a lot more to kind of chew on and do in this. And so that was really cool. So for the moment, we're just talking strictly about the book, and it starts with a bang and with viciousness. And there's a lot of friends of mine who are constant readers who think, shout out to Rob Cordray, actually, he adores Desperation and the Regulators. They are, from what he's gone on record to tell me various times over the years of our internet friendship, unfortunately, we've never got the chance to meet in person or anything, but he has championed these two books for the longest time, and I admittedly overlooked them to a slight degree and didn't give them their proper due, I suppose. But yeah, I'm kind of a convert at this point, which really makes sense with how religiously geared this particular book is. And so starts out with a bang with this. I still laugh every time Peter Jackson, and King does actually play into the joke. And because King scripted I guess it's not quite a miniseries, the made-for-TV movie. King scripted himself the teleplay for the made-for-TV movie. And so he plays in on the joke with Collie being like, I love Lord of the Rings. So I'm glad that he, at least as time went on, admitted that, yeah, it was just kind of a ironic little situation. And so, it starts out with Mary and Peter Jackson, and they are driving down in the Highway 50, which is a very desolate area of through Nevada. I can't remember what other areas that it goes through, but King was inspired after driving this himself on his motorcycle. And so that's where it's very interesting how Johnny, the writer in this, the aging guy who is very much, in my estimation, what King envisions he would have been had he not settled down and got his substance intake into proper, disregard in most fashions, but, just getting himself under control and not being all about that sort of crazy fast living, just hard lifestyle. I think that King very much saw Johnny as what he could have been had he not refrained and just dedicated more and tried to get himself under proper control. And so, yeah, but it's interesting though, because despite him being the stand-in for like another world than these version of Sai King, had he just continued being cray-cray, he still did this very lengthy tour on his Harley where he drove across country. And so once again, write what you know, right, Sai King? And that's obviously what he was doing. And so it's fun in that regard. And Johnny is also another character that is tragically flawed and yet has an opportunity for redemption. So for that reason, he is very much kind of like a Larry Underwood to me, this flawed person who has kind of a good heart, has good intentions, and yet struggles to make those choices and has those inner demons, as we like to say. And so, yes, Johnny being a very interesting character who comes into a similar situation that the Jackson family does at the very beginning of the book. And so when the Jackson family is driving down the 50, though, they see a cat, and a cat is like nailed to a speed limit sign. And then you also see there's like a dog hanging from it's either another sign or a hotel or a bar or some sort of shizzle. But the fact that there is this corrupt law officer, and you don't know if there's a supernatural aspect, at least initially, and you're like, is this person just crazy, or is there a deeper, more massive presence that is in control because of just the sheer lunacy of the situation? And yeah, taken into custody, thrown in, and immediately husband is killed. And so that's where you're just like, wow, King is definitely going for the jugular right off the bat in a character that you think is going to be kind of a mainstay and have to just make their way through the narrative. Who knows how long they'll last, but you thought they were going to have, you thought Peter Jackson was going to have a little bit more longevity than his wife Mary. And yet there is a very funny joke where Kali is like, okay, so you're Peter and you're Mary. Where's Paul? And I'm just like, oh, King, you were such a little chuckler, man. You know, when the Peter, Paul, and Mary, a lot of people of the younger generation may not get the joke. And I only get it because of the fact that my parents were like a byproduct of that era and listened to Puff the Magic Dragon and everything else and had no idea what the hell was being implied. And a lot of people still argue that that was not a song about the Tweedsies, but who the hell knows? So, yeah, it just sets such a grim, desolate sort of vibe right away when you see the abandoned RV and, you know, dolls and, you know, all this different stuff that's strewn about. And then you also see that the town is pretty much abandoned for whatever reason. And when both, you know, the Jacksons and then also the Carver family, which are visiting from Ohio. Yeah, we're talking, what's the name? Wentworth, Ohio. Poplar Street, yeah, that's a direct connection with the Regulators, and there's a lot of direct connections with the Regulators. And so that's why I'm very glad that I read both of them back to back this time. And I definitely took a break between Desperation and the Regulars upon my initial read. I read some graphic novels and a few other things. So I think I probably took a few months between. And so for that reason, and especially since I wasn't keeping spreadsheets and notebooks and all this different stuff and wasn't doing this program at the time, a lot of those parallels, similarities, other worlds than these, you know, different levels of the tower, yada, 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 I didn't get as many of those connections. And so this is why I'm very glad that I read each of them within the span of about 30 days, if not a little bit less, since I was listening to the end of the audiobook at the end of September. Yeah. It was at the beginning of September. And then, well, nonetheless, there was not a large gap of time between the two. And so for that reason, I saw so many more of those kind of connective tissue aspects and stuff. And so, yeah, we have something nasty that has been going on in Desperation, and it is directly connected with the fact that a mine that was going about 150 years before had been reopened because different like ores and alloys and whatever that are in there were suddenly viable once again. And so despite the fact that there was an accident, which we find a little bit more about as the story goes on, and we get more acquainted with I'm trying to remember if it's Tom or Tim, but essentially our Tom Billingsley. Yeah, that's right. So our resident veterinarian who has retired and become like a straight up like drunkard, he's the one who kind of imparts a significant amount of wisdom, being one of the only locals that is actually, well, yeah, pretty much the only local left alive until we find a character in the third act. But yeah, he's the one who eventually has the burden of telling these people who are being slowly captured and taken into custody over the course of the very beginning of the book, you know, being Johnny, our author, between the Carver family, between they don't become captives, but, you know, Johnny's assistant Steve, and then Cynthia from Rose Madder that he ends up picking up. They become a part of the story, but they are a little bit separate from those who and Trigan. I always mess with his pronunciation and stuff like that. But a very fascinating villain, and you think it's just some dude who was gone crazy, despite the fact that he is like bleeding as the story really starts to pick up a little bit of pace at the very beginning from various orifices, and you can tell he is like in a state of decay. And that's when you start to kind of wonder, okay, there is something bigger going on here. And it just unravels in a fascinating fashion. And I have a whole bit of notes as always, guys, but I just wanted to kind of check in and once again specify if you have any sort of thoughts about favorite scenes, favorite beats, ways that this story actually just hit you, inspired you, anything of that nature, please chime in. And obviously, please over the course of it. So I'm going to see who else has joined in the process since our numbers have kind of doubled. Okay. All right. So Travis chimes in. All right, he already said that. Zach King, the original airing, same thing. Okay. Super Tunner says, hello all. Yes, horns up. Most definitely. Zach King says, this has one of the best openings to a King book with the cat nailed to the side. Yeah, it most definitely does. He sets a grimy, gross, like kind of precedence. And I think that's why with Peter getting killed right at the beginning, it hits so hard because it almost does feel like nobody is safe, so to speak. And once again, all of the characters, if I'm not mistaken, that are in Desperation are also in the Regulators, and some of them, like one very gifted child in particular, they find a different fate. But the Regulators in the proper Bachman sort of status, and once again, I'm trying to shy away from a lot of comparisons. I feel like there are more characters in the Bachman Regulators, the Twinner novel, because of the fact that you needed more depth, more craziness, and this one has more of an intimacy to it, in my estimation, in comparison. And I think that was very deliberate on King's part. And so, yes, he did actually write Desperation first, though. So he finished Desperation, and as he was going through the editorial process with like kind of trimming some things down here and there or whatever, that's where he got the idea that what if I put a lot of these characters like Cynthia, like Steve, like Tom and the Jacksons and various others. And unfortunately, yes, our little man who is our beloved youngster Carver. He was like, what if I put them in a drastically different scenario that was Ohio as opposed to Nevada, but yet there's still so much, like there's some characters that are vastly different in the Regulators. Like Collie he still is a law enforcement person, but he has a lot more conviction, and it doesn't have the otherworldly sort of influence. And then, what happens to our lead little kid, which is very tough. But in any event, let's jump right around here as I'm looking through the full extent. Like, man, the amount of things that I have taken down here is just massive. And so, as I'm trying to train the thoughts and whatnot. Okay, we do have more people than I was expecting. It's one brief sec, guys, as I'm trying to find a particular quote that really just kind of set the tone. And dang it. That's the tough thing about actually not being in your proper... Okay, yeah, that's right. Okay, now I got it. Okay. Found it, the extensive notes. And Cinema Mike is here. Evening all. Vera Morris says, hi, guys. Austin Bonnell says, and of course, let's not forget killing a little girl by pushing her down the stairs. Brutal. Yeah, seriously. So besides the death of Peter right off the bat, you also have that aspect of the fact that it's not shown on screen for the film or for like the book itself, but you see the aftermath of a young girl who was nicknamed Pie by David, the brother, and yet Pie was used in a much more strange fashion in the Regulators, a much more Bachman fashion, if we're gonna give nicknames. And so it was the nickname of a man's wife in the Regulators, and yet in this one, David with his sister, is it's just a much more sweet and endearing sort of name, as opposed to the strange sexual connotations that you would probably assume would be the case with a man calling his wife Pie. Okay. Dirt Road Devil says, I really enjoyed the book, but the movie was kind of bad. Yeah, well, it still has some strengths to it. And so we will eventually get to that. Puff the Magic Dragon, Devilweed. Yes, exactly, says Super Tenor. I'm going to watch the Desperation movie, read the Regulators finally, then to reread Desperation. Yeah, how about it? Keep with it. Hot Flash Horror says, I just got these, so I haven't read yet, so I'm impressed with your King content. Excellent job. Hey, I am humbled and honored to have such kind words. And I love these sort of deep dives where you get the chance to actually give extensive thoughts. And I know it's tough when I'm spoiling a lot of things, but in these particular reviews, it kind of is what it is. Love Desperation, didn't care for the Regulators. And yet, Korab, that's the way that I thought initially, but I guess, letting it simmer and giving it some time and then revisiting in that backwards order is what really changed things up a little bit. Late to the party, so I'll start at the beginning and won't chat, but have a great show. Oh, Dominic, thank you so very much, man. Okay, says, I just read both Regulators and Desperation. Looking forward to what you have to say about Desperation. The video about Regulators was great. Yes, I greatly appreciate that. And then, okay, Cinema Mike says, Desperation is not a favorite of mine, but I found some of the historical info on the mind to be interesting. And then we have Thomas DeHart says, hey, Fuego, I've been watching for a while, but first time commenter. Just wanted to say, keep up the good work. Your videos kick ass. Once again, a grande gracias, as I always like to say. So the stage is set very early with the griminess, the desolation, the desperation, so to speak, and the gruesomeness of everything that's going on. And so after the Jacksons have a close encounter of the cop kind, as King puts it, which I thought was very amusing, and the dead cat, nailed to the speed limit sign, which we already mentioned, and then yes, a tongue German Shepherd, and the discussion of the just disgusting degradation of this, like maybe 200 if at best. So it's a town that used to be very prominent. It's clinging for dear life just to actually be relevant and have any reason for people to continue living there. We get to meet Johnny Marinville, and this is one of the things that, as much as I feel like this streamlined stuff, once again with King doing the teleplay, there's so much internalization that you just cannot get unless you read a book. And everything that Johnny is kind of thinking about as he's stopping to take a piss before Kali actually takes him into, into a brief incarceration before the eventual escape and stuff like that. He's thinking about not only his personal addictions, but this is another instance where I think King was addressing his own mortality and his fears of his personal health, because you have this extended bit where he's just thinking, what sort of cancers, what sort of horrible diseases, AIDS, which in 96 was, about on par with cancer. And yet it's weird how the latter we have found ways to treat better than specific forms of cancer. We thought the tide had turned in one case, and then lo and behold. And so there is this extensive rumination and just, first person sort of thinking and discussion from Johnny's character about all of his successes and the women he's bedded and all of his addictions, between a deviated septum from all the cocaine use and all of the insane drinking. But he's been on the wagon for a number of years. He's trying to reinvent himself. He's on this motorcycle drive because of the fact that he's like, okay, what if I switched to nonfiction? And the fact that we still get the same references that we get in the Regulators in Desperation about the fact that, yes, he was the author of Delight. In this one, they don't talk about what Delight is about. In the Regulators, they give you a very direct impression as to the nastiness that subject matter entailed. And so, yeah, Johnny is a very flawed character and self-centered, and yet Steve and Cynthia are probably, Steve being his assistant of sorts, that kind of trails him as he's riding on his motorcycle, and he sets up the live sound and just kind of, as you get a little bit more elaborated in the film. But yeah, Steve is essentially his assistant who trails him, helps him out in every possible capacity, former rock dude. He is almost identical in the Regulators. Just like Cynthia, despite the fact that she doesn't have as much figured out in the Regulators, she's working at a convenience store or whatever. Still, both of those characters, the kind of relationship they end up having, that's where, as King has often said, in certain corresponding universes, you have characters that are similar to almost identical, nearly identical to their respective areas, and yet there's others where you have a guy like Kali who is drastically different, and so that's kind of fascinating. But yeah, those two they strike up a little thing, and I love the fact that King actually kept it relatively innocent throughout the entirety in both the adaptation and in the source material, in the fact that it's almost, but yet, yeah, it's almost like a Big Brother thing initially, and then it turns into, well, maybe this could be a thing, but he never really goes for it, and it's not until the supernatural presence like really kind of, I guess, invigorates their loins or clouds their judgment or some sort of thing in the second act that it turns into something beyond a very close kind of budding friendship and kind of older brother younger sister sort of love. But once again, I'm not here to judge the implications and what King kind of hints at and so on and so forth. But yeah, those two characters are very similar, and they are charged with investigating what happened to Johnny and going into this town of Desperation. And so another bit of parallels that we have is the fact that there is almost a trapped microcosm that Wentworth, that particular street, Poplar Street, in the Regulators becomes, and then also what we get in Desperation, in the fact that there is like a crazy dust storm that starts, and you definitely don't want to be out on the road trying to drive in that sort of thing, as Steve and Cynthia figure out pretty quickly. And so as they don't find Johnny initially, they're like, okay, we got to bust out and we got to go somewhere else and keep looking for him elsewhere, and yet they can't leave. And so eventually, as you guys know, and who have actually read the thing, it turns into something else. But a couple of favorite lines, because y'all know that I always like to do this. And this is one thing I've never lived in Nevada, but I have a lot of friends that are a special breed that live in Nevada. And there is this quote at the very beginning of the book that I find incredibly fascinating. And it's where, so Peter Jackson and his wife, Mary, they are driving this vehicle across the country for his sister. And so that's how they get themselves caught in this crazy shit storm of a situation. But he says, okay, all at once he was frightened, very close to terror, in fact, and he hadn't the slightest idea why. And that's because, Kali had just pulled him over for a strange bit of situation. But this is the line that makes me laugh, because Nevada's full of intense people, Marielle. And so Gary agreed. And this is how intense people act. In a word, weird. Yeah, I've met my fair share of Nevada kind of natives of sorts, or transplants, the sort of person who would want to relocate there and live near the Strip, or would want to just work in that sort of chaotic, crazy environment that is like Reno, Laughlin, Vegas, whatever it may be. You have to be a special breed to actually live near there, but drastically different contrast if you're in a remote mining town like in this one. So that is a personal favorite quote. And then if you want to have a little bit more just interesting insight, and this is because the Carver family has kind of a schism that is forming between them. And so you've got Ellen, if I remember correctly, you have Pi, and then you have Ralph, and then you have David the son. And so David has taken on religion, and it's kind of weirded out the parents just a wee bit. And so this is a line that I thought really epitomized the sweetness of Sai King, and just reemphasized how much, I don't know, just care and conviction that he exudes as a writer. Love stretched to cover a multitude of oddities. And he had an idea. That was one of the things love was for. It's kind of like I always enjoy saying that it's like love warts and all. It's like, yeah, I can love this, whether they're my partner or whether they're my child or whatever, or one of my best friends, I take them in all of their weirdness, so to speak. It's a warts and all sort of situation, as I have always said. And so I'm a big fan of that. And but yeah, Johnny Marinville, fascinating character, very much so, and kind of forced to not only face personal demons, but given the opportunity to rise to the occasion, and yet even as things kind of pan out and play out in the second and the third act, you kind of think he's veering toward being virtuous. And I actually thought, with the Vietnam background and certain other things, that he was relatively virtuous and really cool. And yet, yeah, you have a little bit of clarification. Sorry, I'm gonna just take a quick sip. When you're talking for the hour or something, have to at least keep the mouth fresh. But this is also another thing that I wanted to mention. One of the most Easter egg filled books by Sai King that I have ever read. And so you've got Motocops references, Motocops being from the Regulators. The fact that Pi, David's sister, is actually wearing a Motocop shirt, and she's got I forget the name of the girl who's in the Motocop squad, but she's got one of those toys, and so that's cool. But then we have a mention of the Kentoi. We have as you find out what tack really is, and the strange language that it's speaking, which is what has taken over Kali and presumably other parts in the area, and is just instrumentally responsible for the destruction of this town. I just had to double check, and I went back and I revisited Little Sisters of Euluria, and the sisters, the vampire sisters of sorts, they say a couple of the same phrases, and so they're obviously talking an ancient language of the unformed, and so that's fascinating in a similar fashion. But as they start to kind of peel the layers back, and there's the escape from the local jail, which David is instrumental in, with getting himself all soaked up and getting out, and coming back after obtaining both a firearm and some keys to help the rest of the peeps, like Tom and his father and stuff, escape. Ellen had been taken by that particular point, and that doesn't obviously end good. But yeah, as you start to discover that there is a more supernatural evil going down, as opposed to a crazy madman who went around town killing people, that's where you start to kind of peel back those layers and realize that tack is something ancient that is connected not only with this mining accident, but with just this era in general. It's almost like the ground was always sour. And so you get references to the Tommy Knockers, you get references to Strawberry Spring, you get there is also another really amusing line that Kali says at one particular point, where he's reading off prospective rights to Peter Jackson and his wife, and he's like, anything you say or do can be used against you in the court of Ka. Yeah, so you've got a little bit of Dark Tower here and there, but it's not heavy-handed Dark Tower. And it's, yes, this entity of tack is similar in a lot of ways to what disguised itself as Pennywise. You've also got Dandelo from the back half of Dark Tower 7. And so it seems to be a similar kind of entity, but it doesn't seem to be one that feeds on fear in the same way that the Pennywise Bob Gray entity and then Dandelo did. It's a different sort of situation, but a lot of fan theories and different things on the Dark Towerpedia or the Towerpedia, whatever the heck it is. I'm trying to remember without butchering it. But yeah, I've read a lot of just different comparisons, and so. As far as taking on various guises and being able to jump from body to body, that's the sort of stuff that fascinates me very much about this particular character. But also similar to the extended sort of just evil from Henry Bowers, already evil in it. But it was when the reemergence after the 27 years of the entity in it kind of cranked it up. And so that's kind of what we get, with the you've got your Kanta, or excuse me, your I'm trying to remember, your Kanta and then your Kantak. And so Kanta is essentially these small little creatures, which, shout out to Cecil for giving me this. Check this shizzle out, guys. This was in a recent BAM box. That is a Kanta. So in the mine where this accident transpired, that's where you had an abundance of those. And so it was just interesting to not only get that, but also to just see the nasty power that in this area where there's a relegation of a trapped ancient evil, how these little bastards can basically put people under their control, the Kanta, but then you've also got the Kantak, which is where essentially when you first meet Kali, he is the vessel, and yet the vessel decays rapidly. And so this evil has to continually jump to these new bodies, so to speak. And, Kali wasn't even the first one. There were two before, as we find out. And the first one being the Ripton Kryptonite. I'm trying to remember his name, inconsequential. But yeah, so there is a enlargement after Tak has kind of spread its steam, its presence or whatever, because it's still trapped down in this mine. And so that's where its reach is only so far. And so that's why it can't actually escape. And its end game is in question as the characters start to figure out more and more about the essence of this evil. And David, this young kid who, and this is another thing that you only get touched upon in the Desperation film. And that's the thing. I mean, there's so much in a 700-page book that there is no friggin' way you are going to be able to accomplish in a little over 2 hours. I think it's like 130 minutes or something. But in a 2-hour film, you're not going to, they touch upon why this kid decided, despite being not from a religious family, why he wanted to suddenly become a convert. And he has just conviction, and he has a sweetness of the spirit about him. And it's because David, to the best of his knowledge, was able to harness the power of God, or a powerful presence similar to what we as humans perceive as God, the higher power. And you have to think, if there are higher powers, I don't know if there's just one. And that's the sort of shit that scares me a little bit, being raised Reformed Baptist and all of the aspects associated with that. But yeah, it's just fascinating, because his friend gets in this accident and Brian is basically on his deathbed, brain dead. He's not going to make it. And what does David do? David goes to their little fort hideout, which is like the Viet Cong lookout. And yet that comes into so many connected different areas, which is fascinating. And he prays, and he's not even bargaining. He's just asking if there's any possible way for his best friend to survive. And it's miraculous. His best friend, despite the fact that they were ready to pull the plugs, he suddenly regains consciousness, and he's kind of talking. And from a scientific medical standpoint, they're like, well, we've heard of the very rare, less than 1 percentile occasion of this transpiring. But yeah, they go into King gives so much more richness to his characters in the book, as is always the case. And I mean, even their little thing where it's like, oh shit, the mummy's after us, let's walk a little faster. And the fact that they had this just affinity for Boris Karloff in that particular role, it's really sweet. And so yes, you get so much more backstory on Johnny, and you get so much more backstory on David, and this little prophet that he kind of becomes over the course of this. And also the fact that this group, they were spared not just to become potential vessels for Tak to continue jumping through, but it is very much like, I mean, if we're talking the turtle versus whatever entity Pennywise was, if we're talking about even parallels to The Stand, where we had Abigail and those who she declares as an emissary of God to send into the lion's den, this is King at his most just religiously contemplative and just existential. And as the narrative really plays itself out, and you get into the third act especially, that's where he is talking about the nature of free will, and how God is cruel, but yet God is also fair, and there is often a lesson that is associated with it. And the fact that David becomes this, there's a scene that I had completely forgotten about, and they don't do it justice in the miniseries or the made-for-TV movie, unfortunately. And it's essentially Jesus with the 5 loaves and 2 fish, and where he feeds the 5,000 with it. And so they're passing around the sardines and the Ritz crackers, and they weren't sure initially if, when they're hiding out in this movie theater, if there's enough for everybody. And yet as it goes all the way around, they're like, wow, it doesn't look like anything was actually even taken out of either of these packages. And so it's all of these interesting parallels that King brings and the questions that he asks, most notably, about God being cruel, and yet the fairness and those lessons learned, as I just mentioned. And so it's captivating stuff. Maybe it wouldn't be as much if I hadn't had that strict religious upbringing, Reformed Baptist subsect of a subsect of a subsect and everything. But 18, almost 19 years of it, I had these same sort of spiritual kind of crisis of faith and just resentfulness, and yet still feeling a connection and a questioning in that sort of regard. So there's, once again, this is dense stuff by Sai King. It's very fascinating. And I know that I just briefly touched on the chat as opposed to continuing on. Okay, so Cinema Mike, yep, I got that part. Okay, so I think this is a new one. Nitrama Tatute. Hopefully I'm not butchering that anywhere near as much. Hello, I've enjoyed Desperation very much. The whole aspect of the imposing sheriff literally rotting away. The strange animal behavior kept me glued to the book. I wanted to know what was behind it. Yeah. And that is an interesting thing about this tacker, King said tack, tack, as he was reading it. So I always go with his pronunciation as opposed to talk, as I've heard other reviewers and different friends of mine say. But yeah, not only is there this power to send a aspect of its essence to a singular vessel, as I mentioned, and control them, but you also do have that kanta, and so that's these little runes, these little things that can kind of control people to a degree, but it does make them almost like zombified to a degree, or at least like a more menial kind of controlled sort of pod person, I guess, body snatchers sort of thing. And then you still have the animal aspect and the congregation of everything from coyotes to spiders to scorpions to rattlesnakes to the buzzards. That there is an awesome scene where Johnny is like just beating down this buzzard after Kali is just like, get down and blank my bloody blank, and you're just like, whoa, yo. So yeah, the essence of the fact that Tat can also control the animals in the area, all of these native to the vicinity desert creatures, so to speak, is another aspect. So it has a lengthy reach, but yet it still is subdued and caught in this mine, and didn't even get the chance to start stretching its powers out again until they decided to start working on this on this particular spot in Nevada once again. So, okay, as we continue, Zach King says, have only seen the movie. Having only seen the movie for the longest time, the sexual insanity part caught me off guard. Yeah, well they touch that kanta, and it's a larger one if I remember correctly, and it's the wolf with the snake tongue and all that, and it's so much more graphic in the book. That is the one thing, as the film does show all of the residents of this town that have been brutally murdered, and we're talking they have had their eyes gouged out, they have been shot point blank in the head. There's one particular bit where he took off a kid's cap to shoot him in the head, and then Collie put the cap back on. So that always struck me. He's also mowing people down in his Crown Vic, and it's very brutal. Just whether you're seeing the aftermath of a hand in a fish tank, or whether you're just finding a whole family dead at the dinner table. Like, King is very unflinching in the fact that this is a vicious, brutal, evil presence that we are dealing with here, and it is very hardcore in its degaff sort of no sanctity for life sort of viewpoint, and just very, very one-minded in that regard. So yeah, but it also induces like the weird charge with its presence. Even Johnny at the very end, when he's down in the mine and he's trying to do the vanquishing sort of thing, he's got like a super bony. I mean, it's a very odd charge that you get from this sort of presence. And yeah, it's intriguing in that regard. So Nitrama also says, and of course, King's brilliant writing of characters, making you care very quickly. I would say the movie is somewhat underrated. And that's the thing. I do feel like the film is underrated. And as we've been going for nearly an hour at this particular point, I do need to get to the movie specific here pretty soon. But I mean, I have covered a lot of what I was trying to reference. Oh, another funny line. I see you're an organ donor. Are you sure that's wise? That cracked me up quite a bit. And the back and forth between Steve and Cynthia is very cute, and I'm glad that for the most part it's kept relatively innocent. Them calling each other like cookie and cake and whatever. Cookie, cake, and pie. Well, this like was King just like grubbing on the sweet carbies at the time that he wrote this, and so he had to go through all those different kinds of nicknames and stuff like that. Already mentioned the vile snake snatcher. Already mentioned the bodies on the hooks and just the immense amount. Oh yeah, that's right. The fact that Steve is from Lubbock, but yet he also mentions, this is another Easter egg that I thought was cool at one particular point. He mentions spending some time in Arnett, Texas. Yeah, we're talking Stu Redman. We're talking East Texas. And so, that's another thing. Also the Tommy Knockers reference. And it is just riddled with all kinds of cool Easter eggs for Super Psy King fans. And I mentioned the food miracle, which is cool. When tech is going around, regardless of what sort of body it's in, the fact that it's saying crazy things like JOOs must die, Catholics must die, Mormons must die, Grateful Dead fans must die, you're just like, wow, this is absolute zaniness. And King does most definitely go for people who are just have this blind hatred of things that they either don't understand or just personally from a social political standpoint disagree with. And yeah, King has always led his personal politics, just kind of dwell on his sleeve, as is no surprise in that regard. So yeah, it's a running theme and it's interesting. But then the voice of the outsider, the voice of Tack, this is where, yes, if I have any sort of criticism, the fact that we do have another story with a heavily religious aspect, the fact that we do have another story with a close-knit bit of people that have to go into the den, the lair, so to speak, of this villain. In this, it's the mine. I mean, you have it in The Outsider, you have it in It, you have it in Insomnia. There's a lot of instances where King, and once again, one of our main characters is a writer. So yes, King does have his tropes, as I always admit that he does revisit, and that's totally fine. That when King references Tom Billingsley as Snoop Doggy Doc because he was a veterinarian, and there are just those little blurbs here and there that just amused me so thoroughly. And I'm trying to remember if I mentioned the Tommy Knockers reference earlier. That's where they're essentially trying to recall all of those different aspects about what sort of evil presence could be down there. And there's also a reference to, could it be like a Wendigo sort of thing? So Pet Cemetery reference there as well, which is cool. And they're like, no, Tommy Knockers are like gremlins. They're like troublemakers. And I guess he did outline them as being something similar and a misidentification even in the Tommy Knockers. But so I thought that was pretty rad status. But yeah, as they're basically trying, once the escape has been made, and then as they all meet up and they're at this theater and they're hiding out, and then there's that crazy cougar attack where Tom gets like torn up because it's another animal that has been taken control of by Tack. But that part is brutal. But when you find out a little bit more about the travesty of what went down with these Chinese miners. Sorry, a little itch there. But yeah, it's very evocative of what had actually transpired in the Southwest. I mean, I know that whether it was the mines or whether it was like the railroads and stuff like that, myself being an Irishman, and then, a lot of my Chinese friends, like we have, as like when I was taking some history classes in college, it was something that I discussed with a few friends of mine of, both Irish and Chinese nationality. And the fact that, in that part of the country, in comparison with like the South and stuff, the Southern belt, it was vastly different, the sort of labor of that regard that was being done. And so, yeah, King did research accordingly, and it was fascinating and yet disheartening to realize that that sort of stuff did indeed happen and that there were travesties of that regard. And having just read The Regulators, I probably wouldn't have remembered the fact that little bitty baby Smitty likes to bite his mommy's titty. I mean, yes, that is said by the Seth character in The Regulators when I believe it's Johnny that tries to call 911 in The Regulators, and he that's what he gets instead of proper phone service, is that sort of thing from the possessed Seth character. But once again, this really feels to me like King not only exploring his own fear of death and disease, also his own lost faith, but yet slight just, I don't know, residual status of it, so to speak, and where he's just the spiritual state of unbelief and the fact that God is cruel, but yet as we hear a character say at the very end of this, God's cruel, sure, but God is also good. That verse from 1 John that we get, and our kid David is like, really, God is everything. So it has to kind of encompass both the good and the bad. And the third act does go significantly otherworldly in the fact that David is like jumping into the land of the dead, so to speak, in this dream sort of state, and he gets all kinds of information from a young version of Johnny who's wearing this Yankees cap and everything like that, and he gets essentially as a prophet, it's like the same sort of visions that you got from Elijah and when Jonah was supposed to go to Nineveh and things like that. And yet he also has a moment in the third act where David is like, I can't do it. It's like where Jesus was in Gethsemane and he's like, please, Father, take the cup, don't make me do this. And so it is a moment of self-doubt and weakness. And I feel like those who are the most devout in their spirituality, and I was a atheist for a long time. I was raised Reformed Baptist. Now I consider myself agnostic. But nonetheless, the fascinating thing about this is how King found means of retrofitting so many of these moments from the Holy Bible into this narrative, amongst all of the other things, from talking shit about critics. And so you have your literary sense of Sai King, but then you also have the spiritual, religious sense of Sai King, which is really great in this. And I mean, the discussion of free will is another thing that they really get into in the third act, as they know that they have to go to this mine and they have to go into the lion's den and they have to see if they can prevail. And also the fact that Johnny has his redemptive arc. And so it is very much like Underwood. It is very much like, I guess Johnny Smith was a more virtuous character in the Dead Zone, but it's a flawed character. And this speaks a lot to me as being a very imperfect person myself. It really resonates when you have a character who has done a lot of bad shit and they realize that they have an opportunity to do something, not just for the good of themselves or for like a close loved one or whatever, but something that is like monumental and is going to have like that magnitude sort of reverberating effect. I mean, we're talking like aftershock sort of thing, but in the good way, from an earthquake. And so, yeah, going down into that Chinese mine where there was the death of so many of those workers, and yet when you find out the actual aspect of what happened and how they discovered the evil and the craziness that went down amongst all of them from that the body count was significantly larger. But yeah, what Johnny basically takes upon himself is really heavy. And I respect it greatly, and so that's a bit that I really wanted to touch upon. And tack talk, I already mentioned that. And a character as we segue into the just brief discussion about this adaptation that came out in May of 2006. As was mentioned earlier, they decide to omit a character by the name of Audrey, who was actually her twinner in the Regulators is a very important character, a central character, in fact. But on this level of the tower, she is essentially somebody who is under control, as you find out later, of the entity that is Tak. She has been influenced by the Kanta, and so one of these little bastards, as I said. But yeah, they decided to omit that, and as a screenplay writer, Sai King, a lot of people criticize the way he adapts his own work. He had to streamline so much in this, and in that particular regard, I can't say that I'm going to get like super pissy about the omission of that character, because Audrey is really there to try to steal David and take to Tak, as Ellen is about to, decay and be dead, and Tak has to jump into Mary, who has also been taken and stuff. But with how quickly that character is vanquished, it's not really one that upset me as much, and so that's totally coolio on my part. But I have to say, once again, the cast of this, and the fact that you've got Mick Garris directing, and so he had done, at this particular point, I know he'd done The Stand, I know he had done The Shining, the miniseries, so not to be confused with Kubrick's version, which I still have a soft spot for that one. Steven Weber, who is in this one, was also in that Shining miniseries. I know I think he had already done Bag of Bones, which I hate, despite a decent performance by Pierce Brosnan. And hate is such a strong word, which I am just not a fan of, because I'm not a fan of the book. But so yeah, Mick Garris, a seasoned collaborator of Sai King. He also directed Quicksilver Highway with the Chattery Teeth and with the Clive Barker story. And so Garris directing in 2006, and then Ron Perlman as Collie is great. Steven Weber is great. And then even some of the others, that Tom Skerritt as Johnny is so good. He doesn't have like quite the long hair, as much of that like gut sort of thing going on, from all the years of hard living, but he still embodies the character very well. You've got Matt Frewer, who has been in his fair share of Sai King stuff. I always will think of him as Trash Can Man, but he plays Ralph Carver. He doesn't get as much to do in this, which I found a little bit disappointing. Really, our mainstays in this are Cynthia, who is played by Kelly Overton, and she's done her fair share of things over the years, but she is most notable as of late, excuse me, for being the lead in Vanessa Helsing. Yeah, for a number of years, and she also did some work on True Blood and a couple other things. So, and then also Annabeth Gish as Mary. She has done so much over the years. She was Trish in SLC Punk. I know she was on. She was in Mystic Pizza. She was most recently in Midnight Mass. She's been in she was on Haunting of Hill House as well. So she's got some repertoire with Flanagan. And then also you even have a cameo from Henry Thomas. Yeah, that's right. He is Peter Jackson. He gets killed at the beginning of this, so he doesn't get a lot of screen time, but he's good too. So this was a loaded cast, and I feel like if they had been able to do on a streaming service, okay, as opposed to ABC, and on a streaming service, if they were given like the freedom on a Lisi story, or on The Outsider, like on HBO, or even what they're doing on Chapelwaite right now, even if I don't love that series, I think Adrian Brody's good. It's got its problems. I'm going to be doing a full review of that coming up very soon. But yeah, I think that with this cast, and with nowhere near as many constraints, and also I don't like the way Mick directed this very much. So you've got some beautiful cinematography, and they filmed this in Bisbee, Arizona. Yes, in my deadly desert of Arizona, which was really cool. The town stand-in was perfect for what they were scouting, and they scouted all over Nevada, New Mexico, Arizona. They obviously knew they needed to be in the Southwest for where the story takes place, being Desperation, Nevada, fictional town and everything. But yeah, a lot of the other stuff, despite like some of the more cinematic shots that we get of the terrain and the town, and also the look of the mine is really, really rad. You get some like deep overhead shots where you see just how massive the thing is and all of the ripples of how far they've dug. But yet there's this thing that Mick decides to do in this film where he does all of these, it's these like lower shots, and I think he's using a wide angle lens if I'm not mistaken. So it's like just looking up at the characters countless times. He does these low, just looking up shots, and if you do a few of those, I think it's cool. But when you have such a reliance on it, and he even talked in some of the behind the scenes stuff that's on this DVD, because not only do you have feature commentary with Mick Garris, Ron Perlman, and also producer Mark Sennett, but you also have postcards from Bangor featuring Stephen King. And so you have interviews with King and with Mick Garris, and also about how they were trying to make this for a number of years. And I've liked a lot of Garris's direction. I do think he's underrated and gets a little bit more ridicule. And he's lost in the shuffle compared to guys that have directed a lot of King, like Darabont and Flanagan, who are the two best, obviously. And that's not to take anything away from Reiner, but yeah, just some of Garris's choices and how he wanted his cinematographer to shoot a lot of this. I had some issues, but yet the look of the bodies, the practical effects of some of the death did push things on ABC. You know, you've got people hanging from those hooks. You have dead children and all of that. And there are also some things that King does alter. Beyond the omission of Audrey, you also have the element of Pi, actually, you know, David's younger sister, who was thrown down the stairs and killed by Collie, off screen, and like not even mentioned in, well, it's mentioned in the book, but the scene isn't described. The only thing that's described is the aftermath, when Mary and Peter are being led into the jail cells, and you immediately, upon entering the municipal building, you see a dead little girl. And so haunting and horrifying. But King decided on this other level of the tower, this other turn of the wheel, to turn her into an actual kind of minor character who is instrumental in just helping David figure out some things. Not only there's the initial escape when he sees her, but he also, when they're in the movie theater, this is a bit that he changes. So the extent of the revelation, you get a little bit of it from Billingsley, but the audience is basically privy to the full extent of what transpires in what actually transpired in the mine when David discovers this. It's like a old late 1800s kind of silent newsreel sort of thing. And yeah, it's like washed in this kind of, you know, orangish, grayish kind of deserty sort of look. And you have the scenes of the Chinese workers in there, and you've got where it shows like a little bit of like an oddly moving scene, and it's because, you know, cameras of that sort of moving picture variety were so new around then. And yeah, and then you've got the little word blurb that pops up, like obviously what you saw in the silent films back in the day. And so I did like that visual aesthetic, and I enjoyed the way that he had Pi as kind of this positive spiritual presence that's leading David, as opposed to him having like a dream and somebody from the land of, well, it's somebody else from the land of the dead. You know, it's just not this young version of Johnny at, you know, outside of the Viet Cong overlook or outpost or lookout or you know, whatever the heck it was. So some of those alterations I found interesting, but really it's a incredibly faithful, very streamlined sort of version with a little more gore than I think somebody like ABC would have necessarily been okay with at the time, but he was still able to do it when we don't have those weird upward shots that Garris liked so much. It was good. And I feel like the entire ensemble was very capable. And if there was more to chew on, more to develop certain characters, like, you know, David's father, Ralph, specifically, I thought everybody was very solid in this. And, you know, the old actor who played Tom, not so much. And there was also a downplay of the theme of the alcoholism, but there is definitely a very just, it's not expanded, but very faithful look at the essence of religion, of the Christian variety specifically, obviously, and just whether it's real or not, the just championing of faith and hope for things to be good and doing the right thing and being virtuous and being willing to self-sacrifice for the greater good. Like, these are very residual and resounding themes that I greatly appreciate. And it just resonates with me. It really does. And the one thing that I do have to show you guys is one of my favorite deluxe editions of anything that I own. And anytime I get an excuse to kind of show these off, I have to. But thoughts on the film, please, as we're getting ready, as we're wrapping things up right now. Wrap that shit up, B. Wrap that shit up, B. All of the stuff in this. This is one of the most beautiful deluxe editions that I possess. Just trying to get to my bookmarkers because it is, in fact, a process in that regard. But yeah, such great artwork. You got Kali there looking supremely sinister, obviously. And then a couple other cool beats that we have in here that I want to show off. Here is the aforementioned instance where you have Johnny, our resident badass has-been writer. See how he's just, that's where he's taken down that buzzard, man, and he's being gangster about it, which I appreciate. What is the next little bit? And also each section of the book, because, you know, you've obviously got your chapters, but then you also have the like sections, so to speak. And there's also really cool artwork at the beginning of each of those that is distinctive and different. And so, yeah, you've got the Dead Dogs bit that was, you know, written in front of the actual Welcome to Desperation part. And so that's pretty cool. And then, as Cecil always reminds me, the splash page. So this is where a wolf is delivering this kanta. Yeah, just the fact that we have both like nice penciled stuff, and then we also have these beautiful paintings. It's really, really cool. It's most definitely, I had only looked at this when I first purchased it. I looked at all the art and I was like, oh, that's great. So here we have our cougar moment right there, sitting with the buzzards. So I thought that was pretty rad. And here is the aforementioned dream sequence where pretty much it's a little, well, it's not just a little, it's a lot of exposition where, yeah, David is in this land of the dead dream-like sort of trance, and it's all being just kind of spoon-fed and spelled out for him. So, I mean, you can't fault them for, or fault King for doing at least a little bit of that. Yeah, part 4, where we've got the China pit and just the extent of the snakes. Yeah, these inks or pencils or whatever you would properly describe them as, I mean, they look super, super cool. And then our second and final splash is where Johnny finally makes his way down through into the mine, and he's about to get all self-sacrificey, and you just see the full extent of everything down there and all of just these mishmashes of different creatures that were just trapped down there in this area that was obviously unwittingly unearthed because of man's greed. So that's obviously another thing that I think King was exploring, is the fact that, you know, despite the dangers, despite the history, man's greed, you know, to quote Gordon Gekko, I guess greed is good. And so that's very obviously a thing that is tough to escape in that regard. So yeah, guys, I am a very big fan of this story, and it's always fun to get reacquainted, especially when you haven't read something in like 6-7 years, however long it's been. So I think, whereas before I held these two, no, I think it's the other way around. Yeah, so that's how they connect. Check that shizzle out. Very, very cool. I think I kind of put these in a similar sort of ranking. I think they're on par with their drastic differences. One is a little more contained. One is a little bit more, I guess, thought-provoking, being Desperation with all the religious stuff that King looks into. But yeah, there's an interesting sweetness about the Regulators too. It's a really badass 1-2 punch from the author. And talk about ambition, man, to put, you know, this sort of creativity together, unleash them on the same day. I would still really like to see a remake of this. Once again, give it more time. You know, you can have a whole episode that was essentially just about David and Brian and the sweetness of their friendship. And you could have another instance that was all about, you know, a whole episode about Johnny and, you know, Terry, his wife that he had the kids with, and all that different stuff. You can, I mean, you would set the stage, obviously, initially with the Jacksons and what happens with them. But you could really do it in sequential order. I don't think you would really have to trim down or omit or even augment a lot of stuff. There is so much there that I think is very viable and could be retold in an incredibly fascinating fashion. And so bring it on. I'm going to take one last look at when Rubber Soul comes in at the end. Rob, I've been gushing about I think your two favorite Sai King books for the longest time today already, and then last month talking about the Regulators, dude. But these are upped significantly in my affinity and my appreciation. So but yes, it is going very good, and especially because of the fact that I got the chance to revisit these and get a proper appreciation, even more so than I had before. Okay, Austin says, being from Reno, I can confirm that statement. I'm not sure which one, since it's been going on and on. Yes, there was. Yes, actually, Austin brings up the fact that I think it was Misery in Paradise that Ellen Carver was reading at one particular point. So yeah, I mean, between Tommy Knockers and Arnett and Wendigos and, all these different things, it is just filled with so many references and so many different Easter eggs and nods to other works by Sai King. It's a very rad status in that regard. The first act is also some of the most anxiety-inducing material he has written. Agreed. And this is another thing where, being 96 and he'd been sober for probably around a decade, I don't know if he had done something as visceral as this in quite some time. And it's still, as I already said, I've said brutal, I've said carnage, I've used all of these descriptors and whatever. But yeah, he describes, just more so than anything, the death of characters that people discover over the course of this in such a brutal and kind of disgusting fashion. I mean, he had an axe to grind in various ways, and it's very focused in what it was trying to do, both on the existential and religious standpoint, and all of his thoughts on that, and yet also the fact that he wanted to do something that was just nasty and violent, and was gonna just remind people that, yeah, I'm still the master of horror, motherfuckers. So okay, Hot Flash Horror says, since I haven't read either yet, which would you recommend starting with? Ooh, that is probably the key phrase here, as we're about to wrap things up, since we're at nearly 90 minutes, and that's usually where we try to, finish it down. I guess you could go either way, but I do feel like you're going to have more of a connection with these characters how you first get acquainted with them. Dare I say, the most developed characters in a lot of ways in the Regulators are two characters that, one isn't even in Desperation, and then the other one is just very minor, without spoiling things. So I guess at the end of the day, I would probably actually say read the Regulators beforehand, because of the fact that there is a larger cast of characters in the Regulators, and once again, it's for more people to die, and a lot of them you don't even really get to know super well, but get kind of that more surface level, different sort of interpretation and example of them, and then jump into Desperation afterwards, because the main characters in the Regulators, you find out a lot more about them in Desperation, and that's tough. It's very, very difficult to really specify otherwise. But yeah, you get to know Steve better in Desperation. I feel like you get to know Cynthia better in the Regulators. You get to know I guess you get to know Tom Billingsley a little bit better in the Regulators. In Desperation. God damn, it's tough. It's very tough. But I guess at least for now, after the reread of both Regulators and then Desperation, because the most important ones in the Bachman book, the Bachman Twinner-verse of this, you get more out of them and get to know them better, because they're really not that drastically different in Desperation. So I guess that's my choice, and I'm sticking to it. So. Okay. Dominic Audie says, not done yet with Dark Tower. The details of the multiverse. Is Tak in both novels and a single being, or is this Twinners? Well, I guess that's up to interpretation, but I guess I will definitely at least say that Tak is very much a presence in both and has an origination from the same place. Rob says, best advice I can give for Desperation, read it, don't listen to it. King's reading is boring. Oh, Rob, I completely disagree. Art is subjective, so that is just personal opinion in that regard. And then Dominic also says there is a reference somewhere to the fact that Tak and the sisters talk in the same language of the dead. Yep, indeed, the language of the unformed, as they like to call it. Wow, bag of bones, oversell. I totally disagree, but some people are big fans of that particular one. Okay, I'm just getting through the last of the comments before we wrap it all up, everybody. Cinema Mike says, I think this is actually one of King's better adaptations. He was able to condense the material without losing the story. Spook Dev says, I stab at thee with a Pennicon. I need that deluxe edition. Yeah, Rob, it's badass. And I looked for it for the longest time to get it for around its initial retail price that I think was like 60, maybe 80. But yeah, it goes for a few hundred in a lot of different sectors. And so I was blessed. Is that a Cemetery Dance edition? No, it is actually not. And yet, you guys know I shout out Cemetery Dance all the time. This is from Grant. And Grant actually does all of the Dark Tower deluxe stuff that you have seen. So the original releases of the Dark Tower are actually, I think all the releases of the Dark Tower stuff are Grant. So, and there's also a great deluxe of the Talisman and Black House that is also done by Grant. So, okay. Oh yes, I wanted to get this edition for quite some time. It looks amazing. Yeah, it's really, really incredible, and I'm blessed to have it. Okay, so Rob says, I consider Regulators and Desperation two parts of the same story. I totally agree. Even though they are not like Alice in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass, but yet Through the Looking Glass released afterwards, these both released on the same day. That's where it gets a little tough. Fuego, everyone, have a great rest of the week. Awesome stream. Awesome. Thank you so very much. Talk a lot. Talk a one. I love it. Talking that. Glad everyone's enjoying this stream. Yep, we are wrapping it up right now. So as I extend a grande gracias, everyone, I have to obviously mention what our book of the month here for October is, and it is none other than The Last Castle Rock Story. Yeah, for its 30th anniversary at the beginning of November, we are going to be discussing Needful Things. And Needful Things is a monster of a book. This will also be my first time revisiting this since the initial reading. And so, yeah, very stoked about that. And yeah, you can all look forward to the first Tuesday of November, all of us having some more live palaver about that. So once again, gracias, everyone. I have been Jaime and Fuego here on one of the many horror show sets at the horror show headquarters that Cecil has put together. So it was a lot of fun to switch things up out of necessity after we got to do a review of A24's Lamb. Stay tuned for that. I believe it's going to be coming on Friday. And then tomorrow, Wednesday, we're going to have a review of There's Someone in Your House. I think that's, if I remember the title correctly, it's a new Netflix slasher that is available tomorrow. So that's why we're putting up the review tomorrow. We also have upcoming bits covering Halloween Kills, Dune, various other things. Cecil is going to be having a discussion with a special guest, giving some predictions about the Chucky series that is upcoming. So, I mean, October, as you would expect, is going to be amazingly busy, and we are very excited to just have all of you on board and supporting us throughout the extent of it. So, I have been Fuego, y'all have been Rad Status, and until the Wheel of Ka comes around once more, hasta luego, Sin Amigos, constant readers and viewers alike, say thank you. I hope we have been well met and that we get to share more of this palaver sooner rather than later. And until then, remember to stay scad and read Stephen King. Yes, definitely read The Regulators and Desperation. I agree with Rob that they are just two parts of the same story. It's not like you're going to read Through the Looking Glass and, before or after Alice in Wonderland. They're both tremendous. And don't forget, for next month, Needful Things. Gracias, everybody. Thanks, Cinema Mike. Rob, very glad that you got to chime in on this one, even if it was relatively briefly. So, all right, everybody. Got some more work to do, but adios.